So Time's Open. This is where we interface with you about technology. Today we're going to be talking about HTML5, which is a technology I care a lot about and has really become sort of not just the hot, cool thing, but the serious thing. People around here take HTML5 and related web technologies really seriously now. People that you wouldn't even think, people you think that would be so removed from technology that they wouldn't even know that word, they know that word here. This has really caught on in the mind of at least our leadership, and I imagine it might be with some of yours too. So we wanted to talk a little bit about not only HTML5 and where it's going, but sort of related technologies that the people who are excited by HTML5 are also excited by. So what we're talking about tonight, the topics we're going to be going over, is sort of like my dream list of possible topics to go over. When we were sitting in the room, it was like, you know what I want to talk about? I want to talk about what's next for HTML5. I want to talk about CoffeeScript. I want to talk about node.js. And it seems like everybody wants to talk about those. So that's what we got. And we have 3 great speakers for you to hear from, to talk about these topics, to show you what they're doing, show you how they're doing it,
with Node, because we can share the language, we can share libraries, we can share a whole bunch of other stuff, it makes it much easier writing a single coherent application that can really work together. And then chart.nodedemo.com. So while I'm talking, feel free to navigate to that on your phones. So here I have an awesome HTML5 site. I'm taking some data in a text box and rendering a chart. This is using a library called HiCharts, which render these great animated interactive charts on the client side. If any of you have an Android device and are checking this out, it's probably not working so great for you. This is because it doesn't actually have SVG support in their browsers. To give a much more extreme example, let's open this up in Firefox. Try again, of course. And what I've done here is actually completely disabled JavaScript. So of course, any kind of JavaScript charting library we have running in the client's not going to run at all. So yeah, it's effectively broken. However, all this HiCharts library is actually doing is actually using the DOM APIs to render a series of elements inside the browser. Like down here, we have a load of SVG elements. HiCharts is just the JavaScript library. So using the very same techniques we showed, loading that into Node, we can use the very, loading jQuery into Node, we can use the very same techniques to load HiCharts into Node. So I'm not going to code all this up now, but here's a little example where I've actually loaded in jQuery and the HiCharts library. So this is exactly the same code I'm using on the client, pulling it out of our Node-based document, creating a container for HiCharts to render into, doing things with the some options for the chart, like turning off animation, which wouldn't really make much sense. And then asking HiCharts to render into my server-side DOM. At which point, I'm going to ask jQuery to pull out the SVG contents, this is just the text of the SVG, and then use a command line tool from ImageMagick called Convert, where I can pump in that SVG, and it will return me a PNG image, something that most browsers can display regardless of JavaScript. And then I'm going to buffer it and write it out. The end result is, if I go to chart after.com, .nodedemo.com, we try it in Chrome, where we still got JavaScript and SVG as enabled. You'll see it's still working normally the way we expect. Whereas if we do it in Firefox, where I've disabled JavaScript, because now the client, the JavaScript on the client isn't handling that form post, it's going to send up to the server, at which point I load those same content into JS DOM and render that SVG into an image. So here it is.
CoffeeScript is a little language, or I like to call it a little language, although I saw it as a fancy language in David's slides, that compiles into JavaScript. And it hasn't been around for very long. To give you a brief overview, its initial release was done about 1.5 years ago at an NYCJS meetup not too far from here. CoffeeScript is a little language that tries to play with what's possible in terms of JavaScript. trying to expose the good parts, the famous good parts of JavaScript, while sweeping the awkward bits under the rug to as great an extent as possible. It's not entirely possible, but as much as you can. For example, things like numbers, where the semantics of numbers you can't really change without really slowing things down. And this comes from the perspective of someone who spends most of their day writing JavaScript web apps and asking the kind of what-if questions. So what if you don't have to worry about semicolons or trailing commas in your apps? What if you don't have to wrangle with the prototype chain every time you want to make a new object without having to copy all your functions over? What would be the minimalist syntax for defining a function, or for defining a function where the value of this doesn't change out from underneath your feet when you pass it off to a callback?
I'm going to talk about a bunch of stuff today that is the stuff that you can't really play with today. Can't play with it tomorrow. You might be able to play with it in a couple months. But it's stuff that's coming up within the next couple of months. It's stuff that still, if you play with it today, it may not work if you play with it today, right? Like as the new browsers ship, as the specs change. These things aren't quite ready for the real world yet. So I showed this one a bunch of times. This is one of my favorite ones, especially to demo live, only because a live demo of any kind of speech input always gets a little bit fun. Let me just actually make sure I have a good network connection. All right. So you can add this on any element today. And this is actually one I tell a lot of folks, like if you've got a search box or you've got something on your page and you want to go do it, like add this today, because if it doesn't work, nobody's going to notice, right? Like they're not going to see that speech input box. But if they do, they're going to be like pleasantly surprised. So go click on this, the rain in Spain. I like that because it's kind of fun, it's a little complex. And so sure enough, you get the rain in Spain. So it just takes your voice, it sends it up to the cloud, figures out what you said, sends it down, sticks it in. Did the same demo with one of my coworkers a couple of months ago. And he's from Spain, so he's got a very thick Spanish accent. And I'll show you something here. So there's a set of APIs that will also give you all of the things that that person possibly could have said, right? So you can go through and see what else they might have said if it really isn't sure. So it's got a confidence level of 93, almost 94% that I said the rain in Spain, right? Ah, it did it to me. Third one down. The way to S star 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 star, right? Like, unfortunately, it won't give you the fun words, but you can get an idea. So you can see if the person says something where you're not quite sure that they said what you're looking for if you're trying to do a search. Maybe you're trying to do some kind of training application where they have to go and say something. So they're maybe doing radio training. Car 1 to car 2. Is it what you expect? Yes. Yay, you can use that. Is it not? Okay, well, is it close? Maybe they were mumbling. So there's a bunch of really neat things that you can do with this.